Hi, how are you guys? My name is Zain Buzaid, and today I'm going to be teaching you guys about death, dying, and decomposition. Feel free to stop me or ask me any questions during the presentation. So first here we have death. What's death, you ask? Well, obviously, as we all know, it's the end of life. Another definition of death is the cessation or the end of life. Death, it is characterized by irreversible stopping of blood circulation and brain activity. When the heart stops beating, oxygen is deprived from the body cells and begins a process known as autolysis. Once enough cells die and begin to break down, life cannot be restarted. Feel free to stop me anytime, by the way. Next, here we have autopsy. Autopsy basically is an examination done on a body when you don't know how they died. An autopsy could be done by a pathologist or sometimes a county coroner. The actual definition is in cases of suspicious or unnatural death, a pathologist conducts post-mortem examination called an autopsy. Autopsies are conducted to determine the manner of death, means by which they died, cause of death, the reason they died, mechanism of death, a specific body failure, and time of death, when they died. As you saw on the last slide, we also talked about manner of death, as we see here, which of course means by which they died. 5 categories of manner of death can appear on death certificates: natural, accidental, suicidal, homicidal, and undetermined. Next, we are going to be talking about the cause of death and the mechanism of death. Cause of death is the reason a person died. Natural causes include disease, cancer, physical injury, stroke, heart attack, etc. Homicidal and suicidal causes include shooting, burning, poisoning, hanging, drowning, suffocation, etc. Proximate cause of death refers to an underlying cause of death, as opposed to the final cause. For example, if someone is exposed to large amount of radiation and develops cancer, the proximate cause of death is exposure to radiation. Mechanism of death describes specific change in the body that brought about the cessation of life. I'm going to give you guys a couple seconds to write this down here. Right now, I'm going to give you some examples of mechanism of death. So what are some examples of mechanism of death? If someone has been shot, they may die from loss of blood, called exsanguination, or bleeding to death. If someone has a heart attack, they may die from pulmonary arrest, or the heart stopping. If someone is strangled, they may die from asphyxiation, or lack of oxygen. Time of death. During an autopsy, the forensic examiner wants to determine when the person died. A time of death helps forensic detectives include or exclude suspects based on their alibis or location at that time. Next, we have the types of mortis. First, here we have the livor mortis, or death color, and that is the pooling of blood in tissues after death. Next, we have the rigor mortis, or death stiffness. That is the stiffening of skeletal muscles after death. Lastly, we have algor mortis, or death heat, and that is the cooling of body after death. I'm gonna give you guys a second to write over here. Right here, we're going to be talking about the livor mortis. As body decomposition begins, blood settles in the lower parts of the victim's bodies. Red blood cells break and release hemoglobin, which turn purple as they spill out of cells. Wherever these pools of blood settle, the skin takes on a purple coloring. The pooling of blood is known as lividity. That begins 2 hours after death, and between 2 to 8 hours after death, the color will disappear when the skin is pressed on. After 8 hours, the discoloration becomes permanent. Livor mortis not only helps approximate time of death, but also indicates the positioning of the body during the first 8 hours of death. How do they indicate it, you ask? For example, if discoloration is on the front of the body, the person was face down. So this actually helps a lot with the autopsy because it shows how they died or where they landed on, basically. Next, we have the stomach and intestinal contents. The time of death can also be estimated by looking at the digestive tract and its contents. It takes about 4 to 6 hours for the stomach to empty its contents into the small intestine. It takes 12 hours for food to leave the small intestine. It also takes 24 hours from the time a meal is eaten until all undigested food is released from the large intestines. The location of food in the digestive tract helps scientists estimate how long after a person ate that they died. Changes in the eye. Following death, the surface of the eyes dry out. If the eyes are open at death, a thin film will appear on the eyes in 2 to 3 hours. If the eyes are closed, it takes about 24 hours for this film to appear. Insects. Insects are so useful in crime investigation today. There is a whole branch devoted to it called forensic entomology. So there's a question. What's forensic entomology, you ask? Well, the main job duty of a forensic entomologist is to find post-mortem interval, which is the minimum amount of time someone could have been dead. Next, we have insects, basically continued. So, why are insects used in forensic science? Well, insects colonize a dead body almost immediately after death. Their rate of development and species dynamics over time can be used to accurately determine time since death. After 72 hours, entomological evidence is the most accurate method to determine the elapsed time since death. What can insects tell you? Well, first they can tell you the post-mortem interval, then whether the body was moved after death. Also, whether the body was disturbed. It can tell you the presence and position of wound sites, if the victim used drugs or was poisoned, and the length of time of abuse or neglect in living victims. Stages of decomposition. What are the stages of decomposition, you ask? Bodies begin to decompose shortly after death and do so in 5 predictable stages. First, we have fresh. Then we have bloat or putrefaction, active decay or black putrefaction, advanced decay, dry remains, or skeletonization. Next here, we have fresh. If you're wondering what fresh is, I'm going to tell you right now. Well, fresh begins almost instantly after death. Liver, rigor, and algor mortis occur. Autolysis, or self-digestion, begins as lysosomes break down and release their digestive enzymes into the cell. Visible changes caused by decomposition are limited during the fresh stage, although autolysis may cause blisters to appear at the surface of the skin. So there's a question also coming for fresh, and it is what autolysis is. And so the definition I got is, it is the destruction of cells or tissue by their own enzymes, especially those released by lysosomes. So I'm gonna give you guys another second to write that down too. So that's what autolysis means, and you're gonna see that a couple more times through this presentation. Bloat putrefaction. This stage of death is mostly due to the activities of microorganisms. First, intestinal flora, then saprophytic bacteria and fungi. It is characterized by the production of gases which give rise to the bloated appearance of decomposing body and strong odor. And the skin turns greenish color as the body decomposes. Skin may break apart and fluid can flow out from the openings. I'm going to give you guys a second to write down. So there's a question. What does putrefaction mean? Well, putrefaction means that, or it is the process of decay or rotting in the body or other organic matter. I hope that answered your question. Now we're gonna go to the next slide. Next, we have active decay. This stage is recognizable by a great loss in mass, due largely to feedings by maggots or other insects. Parts of flesh may be black and corpse give off an even stronger odor. As gases escape and the body leaks decomposition fluids, the body may collapse. This end of the stage is marked by the dispersal of the maggots from the body. Next, we have advanced decay. The body begins to dry and preserve itself, and most of the flesh is gone. Odor and insect activity decrease, and body may form a wax layer known as the adipocere. And dry remains. This is the final stage. This is recognizable by a loss of everything on the body but dried up bone. Next, we have speed of decomposition. So what factors does this depend on? First here, we have age. And the young decompose faster than the elderly. Next, we have size of body. Overweight people decompose faster than average people. Next, we have clothing. And naked decompose faster than clothed. Next, we have health, and the sick decompose faster than the healthy. Lastly, we have environmental conditions, and bodies decompose faster in 70 to 99 degrees Fahrenheit. I'm going to give you guys a second to write, and this is also going to conclude our presentation. To conclude conclude my presentation. Thank you guys for listening. I hope you guys learned today about death, dying, and decomposition. And if you guys have any other questions, please feel free to ask me.